Okay, we've seen the basics of MySQL. We have a database set up on our virtual machine, actually on the same virtual machine where we're going to run Python. So Python will interact with the database stored on the local host. Of course, Python can interact with the database on other hosts, but for simplicity, we are going to use the same virtual machine. I will add a file to this lecture detailing some settings you should make for accessing a database on a remote Linux host. You should check that out. Anyway, back to our scenario, let's use Python to do some operations on our database. Make sure you have two root terminals open, one with the MySQL shell and the other with the Linux shell. In this second terminal, we are going to create a new file and do all of our work inside that file. I think this would be much easier than doing it in the Python interpreter. So let's go ahead and create a file. Let's say touch.sql.py. First, we should import the MySQL database module, which I have already installed for you on the virtual machine. So let's open the Python file and start doing the fun stuff. sql.py, I for insert. So the first thing we should do is import MySQL db. Notice I used import as. This basically creates an alias for the module name. So when you reference variables and functions inside that module, you will type in a shorter name as a prefix to that variable or function. You should see this as an abbreviation of the module name. So now let's define some variables that we are going to use to connect into the MySQL database. So let me paste them. Here they are. Okay. Now let's connect to the database using these parameters. For this, we are going to create an SQL connection that calls the connect method from the MySQL database or MDB module and pass our variables as arguments to this method. So let's call this SQL connection equals mdb.connect, and in between parentheses we are going to enter the parameters we just defined. So SQL host, SQL username, SQL password, and finally SQL database. Okay, and for now let's just print SQL connection and save our file. Now let's run it. So python sql.py. Okay, so now you can see that we have a MySQL connection to the local host. Now let's use it. Let's open the file again and comment the print statement. So I for insert and the hash sign. The next step is to create a cursor object. This cursor helps you execute different commands on the SQL database. So let's create one and initialize it for the connection we just opened. Let's say cursor equals SQL connection dot cursor. Good. Now it's time to use this cursor to execute some commands in our database. The first command we should execute is the one specifying the database we will refer to. So cursor.execute, and in between parentheses and in between double quotes, let's type in use netmon as we did in the previous lecture. Notice that this time the semicolon can be skipped, so don't worry about it. The semicolon is mandatory in the SQL shell though, so remember this. Now let's create a new table in our database using Python. So first let's check the existing tables. Show tables. Okay. Now let's create a new table using cursor.execute. So cursor.execute. Now let me type in the command. So this new table called from Python will have three columns. The first will have a data type of varchar. The second will host only integer values, and the third column will have floating point numbers. Now, before checking our application, let's also save our database content. In the MySQL shell, you would do that with the commit command like this. So commit and a semicolon. In Python, you can execute the same operation with the commit method. So Let's go ahead and do this. SQL connection dot commit. And the final step should be closing the SQL connection, which is done using the close method. So SQL connection dot close. Now let's save the file and run it again. Let's check our database now. So show tables. And success. Our table was created right here. Great. Now let's see its structure. Describe from Python. So we have all the columns and data types in place. Nice. We made Python communicate with the MySQL database. This opens a lot of opportunities. Let's insert some data into our table. Let's make a query. This way we can play with our new toy. First, let's insert a row into the table. Since the table already exists, we should comment the line that creates it, just to avoid the MySQL error. So let's go ahead and do this. I for insert. We'll comment this. Okay. And now we should write a new line. So let's type it here. Cursor dot execute. Okay, so I typed in the insert statement. So we have insert into from Python. This is our new table in the database. Then we have the column names, the values keyword, and the values we are going to insert. So string for column 1, 10 for column 2, and 123.45 for column 3. Okay. Now let's save the file and run it one more time. Seems like we have a syntax error. I think we should use single quotes because we used double quotes to enclose the insert statement. So let me go ahead and try this. Sorry. Let me replace the double quotes here with single quotes. Okay, let's save it one more time and try to run it. Okay, great. This time it worked. Now let's check our table by doing a select all from Python. And success again. We have inserted some data into an SQL table using Python. Cool. Finally, what if you want to execute a MySQL query on the database? Like the one we just did, select all from Python. How would you do that from within a Python application? The first step is to use the same cursor.execute method to send and execute the command into MySQL. So let's comment the line inserting data and write a new one. Okay. Let's say cursor.execute and in between double quotes select all from Python. Okay. The second step is to capture the output and maybe store it in a variable. This is done using the fetch1, fetchMany, or fetchAll methods. Fetch1 fetches a single row of a query. FetchMany returns the number of rows you input in between parentheses, and fetchAll fetches all the rows returned by the query. From Python's point of view, each row in the table is going to be returned in the form of a tuple. So let's do it. Let's apply the fetch1 method to the cursor, because we have a single row there anyway, and store the result in a variable. And of course, print the value for that variable. So let's say output equals cursor dot fetch1 without any parameters. And of course, print output. Now let's save it and see what we get back. Great, except one thing. Notice the capital L following 10. This means a long type, although we had 10 as an integer in MySQL. This is due to some issues when converting integers using the MySQL module. No problem, this can easily be fixed by applying the int function in Python on that tuple element, something like int of output of element at index 1. And that's it. Okay, I think we're about done with Python and MySQL. Of course, many other things can be done in MySQL using Python, but that could be the subject for an entire course.